My story will be brief. The reason for this is simple. What struck me most about this case was the indifference and inaction of the police, and because of this, the story will be short. There are very few facts available. Once again, I'm convinced that indifference is more dangerous than stupidity. It always leads to inaction and a lack of results. I apologize in advance. The text will include some of my personal conclusions. You'll easily distinguish them from the facts. I simply can't hold back when I encounter such disregard from those who are supposed to protect us. Fayetteville, North Carolina, December 25, 1985. Debbie Wolfe finished her shift and, as we can assume, headed home. But the next day, she didn't show up for work, which was very unusual for Debbie. After all, she worked as a nurse, an extremely responsible profession. Despite numerous calls, the hospital couldn't get in touch with Debbie. A few hours later, her mother, Jenny Edwards, and a friend, Kevin Gordon, went to Debbie's house to check on her and make sure she was okay. When they arrived, they immediately sensed that something was very wrong. For starters, everything was in a chaotic mess. Debbie's car was parked in an unusual spot where she'd never park. The driver's seat was pushed all the way back, too far for someone of Debbie's height. Empty beer cans were scattered around the yard, and the house was in disarray. Her nurse's uniform was lying on the kitchen floor. But the most alarming detail was that Debbie's two beloved dogs were running around the yard without their leashes and were clearly hungry. They hadn't been fed since the previous morning. Debbie never left her dogs running loose when she wasn't home. While inspecting the house and property, Jenny and Kevin noticed the answering machine blinking with a new voice message. It was from a man who said he was concerned about Debbie and hoped she was okay and wouldn't miss work again. The message seemed extremely odd. Debbie never skipped work, so there was no reason for anyone to reproach her for it. The voice didn't belong to her employer or any colleagues, and the call came at a time when Debbie should have already been at work for 3 hours, known only to her close contacts. Debbie's mother, Jenny, called the Cumberland County Sheriff's Office and spoke with Captain Jack Watts about her missing daughter. The captain immediately dispatched officers to Debbie's house. The officers arrived with tracking dogs and searched the house, but the dogs were no help and didn't lead to any clues. They also refused to search the pond behind Debbie's house, assuming that Jenny and Kevin had already done so before their arrival, despite the pair insisting they hadn't. It wasn't even technically possible for them to do so. During questioning, Jenny recalled 2 men who had shown interest in Debbie and wanted to get close to her. It's worth mentioning that Debbie was very open with her friends and family, sharing everything that happened in her life. So, everyone close to Debbie knew about these 2 men. Interestingly, both of them were volunteers at a local nursing home. As soon as the police learned about these men, they became the main suspects in Debbie's disappearance. One of them refused to take a polygraph test, but provided an alibi for the time of her disappearance, which was verified and confirmed. Soon after, he left town. The other man was also questioned, but it was proven that he had no connection to the case. After that, the investigation just stalled. The suspects didn't provide any useful information. No body. Was there even a crime? Could the girl have simply decided to take a trip and get away from everyone? After all, it had only been 3 days since she disappeared. Was there really a reason to worry? Yes, her friends and, most importantly, her mother were sure there was. Jenny was furious that the search of her daughter's home had been conducted so carelessly, and no one, absolutely no one, had checked the pond. The police didn't feel it was necessary to listen to a missing girl's mother, so she decided to take matters into her own hands. On January 1st, Kevin Gordon, at Jenny's request, returned to Debbie's house. He was accompanied by his friend, Gordon Childress, who had experience in underwater rescue operations. It only took them a couple of minutes to walk around the pond and spot strange marks on the ground, resembling drag marks. Gordon searched the pond's bottom and found Debbie's lifeless body, 9 meters from the shore, in just 1.7 meters of water. It appeared she had been placed inside a 55-gallon oil drum, which she used to store firewood in her yard. The next day, the coroner released the autopsy findings. It stated that no drugs or alcohol were found in Debbie's system. I remind you of the large number of empty beer cans her family discovered during their initial visit to the house. Interestingly, the cause of death was listed as undetermined. The medical examiner couldn't determine if the drowning was accidental or a homicide. When suspicious deaths occur, investigators often look at various factors to help them conclude whether it was an accident or murder. Clues found in and around the barrel, as well as on Debbie's body, should have suggested to the investigators that they were dealing with a murder. The autopsy findings should have raised concerns about the unusual circumstances of Debbie's death. First, she had several scratches on her fingers, which could have been defensive wounds. Second, it's reasonable to assume that drowning victims would have their eyes and mouth open. They fight for their lives, trying to grasp for air. However, Debbie's eyes and mouth were closed, and her body inside the barrel appeared relaxed. Also, drowning victims typically have white foam or froth in their airways or exuding from their mouth or nostrils. But no foam or froth was found in Debbie's body. In fact, the autopsy revealed only half a teaspoon of water in the upper bronchial section of her lungs. Could it be that Debbie was unconscious before entering the pond? Despite all of this, the police officially ruled Debbie's death an accidental drowning. Captain Jack Watts even shared his theory on the matter. He confidently stated that Debbie was playing with her dogs, hence why they were loose in the yard, slipped, fell into the water, and couldn't get out. The official conclusion was immersion syndrome. Immersion syndrome occurs almost immediately upon contact with cold water. It's triggered by cold-induced ventricular arrhythmia or asystole, leading to sudden death. Most victims are rarely saved, and the majority drown. The syndrome is caused by a reflex mechanism, the diving reflex, where immersion of the face in cold water results in apnea, bradycardia, and pronounced peripheral vasoconstriction. But all of this sounds extremely strange. A sober young woman drowns in a pond where the maximum depth is only about 2 meters. To reach the deeper part, one has to walk 1.5 to 2 meters from the shore. Moreover, the captain of the police even denied how Debbie was found, stating that there was no barrel at all. That claim came solely from friends and family, and Gordon even demanded to give a formal statement on the record, explaining how and where he found Debbie. Unfortunately, the story of police indifference doesn't end here. Due to the initial shock of learning about her daughter's death, Jenny didn't immediately notice several key details. She wasn't made aware of them until she was allowed to retrieve the clothes in which Debbie was found in the pond. It became immediately clear that those clothes couldn't have belonged to Debbie. She was wearing a bra for a size 3 bust, far too large for her. The pants were way too long for Debbie's height. The shoes, Debbie wore a women's size 7, but she had on men's size 6 Nike sneakers, which would have been much too big for her. The t-shirt and jacket Debbie wore were not recognized as her belongings by either her family or friends. From that moment on, Debbie's mother and her friends were convinced that Debbie's death was a murder, and that the murderer was the man who left the voice message on the answering machine. The Cumberland County Sheriff's Office sees things differently and told the family that there was no evidence to classify the case as a crime. To this day, Debbie Wolf's death is considered an accidental drowning. The case remains closed.